Is Candy Crush
No. I didn't necessarily want to get into that.
Okay, so I'm here with Rob Garden. Nearly said Gardner. I'm so sorry. Rob is the Director of Communications and Strategy at Levergy. Is that correct? Did I
Correct.
get that right?
I mean, 50-50, but yeah, I'll
Okay,
take it.
it works.
It works,
Roundabout.
yeah.
Yeah. So Rob, I was excited to talk to you today. It's obviously the first time that we're meeting. And I briefly chatted to you a little bit before we started.
Mm,
And I thought something was quite interesting in your description of Levergy.
yeah,
So I'm going to ask you to introduce Levergy and tell me what Levergy does.
cool. So, yeah, Levergy is the company I work for. So we are essentially an agency. Most people know an advertising agency. So similar sort of concept. We work with brands, but very kind of specialized role in how we work with brands. So I guess the kind of formal spiel is that we connect brands to consumers through the things that they love.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, we're a passions agency. So we kind of will link up a big brand. So we work with the likes of Nedbank, Telkom, Heineken, New Balance, with someone they're targeting, someone they see as their core target audience, by connecting with them through a passion point. So that
Mm-hmm.
could be sport, it could be wine, food, it could be gaming. So yeah, I suppose that's the core of what we do, very specialized.
Yeah, so I thought that passion element was really interesting, as opposed to, as I said earlier, like presenting a brand and just
Mm,
seeing what a market does with the brand kind of thing.
yeah.
So why gaming specifically? We are here sort of on the topic of gaming. So
Mm.
why was gaming interesting to you guys? How did that evolve from Levergy's side? Um,
So
yeah.
yeah, we specifically work in gaming with Telkom, who's a client of ours. So they obviously involved in VS gaming. It's very clear sort of brand fit for them. Obviously, having I suppose you could call it the tools of the trade, being
Mhm.
almost a fiber or a broadband provider, and that's the core of what you need to be a gamer, I
Mhm.
guess.
You need internet, yeah,
Yeah,
in general.
obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was a relatively new field for us once they came on as a client a couple of years ago. Obviously, it's very much part of Passion Points that is growing quite
Mhm.
rapidly. You've seen rapid growth in Europe, but in South Africa, last couple of years, we're seeing big, big growth. So it was
Mhm.
something that I think all of us had to learn very quickly. Yeah, I think a real core difference that I've realized in sort of my time working on it, whereas we've always had a very, I suppose you can call it a traditional sport background.
Mhm.
But the key difference in gaming for a brand, where I think the major opportunity lies, is in gaming, you typically are dealing with the participant.
Right.
Whereas if you're in rugby or cricket or soccer, you're dealing with a fan. And
Mhm.
so that's not to say you're not dealing with a fan in gaming, you are, but you are more likely to be able to reach a participant, which is quite a
Mhm.
powerful thing, I think.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was talking to Marseille about this. I've only recently sort of not made the distinction, but classified the distinction between esports and gaming entertainment.
Yeah.
So, how does that market split work for you guys? Is there a different approach for gaming entertainment as opposed to esports, or does it kind of fall under the same bracket?
Yes and no to your latter question. So I think when a brand is involved in it, my opinion on it, where the major opportunity lies for them, is it's very powerful to be involved in esports,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not going to be the majority of who you're speaking to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that is where there is a similarity with a more traditional sport is
Mm-hmm.
um, you're going to have a much smaller number of so-called professionals.
Right.
But I think where the opportunity is to use an involvement in esports as a proof point to why you are going to be of benefit to a gamer, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so for Telkom, going back to the example that I work with, to be involved in VS gaming and to be able to talk about how we are involved in a more professional sort of setup
Mm-hmm.
can become this proof point to be able to say to a more average gamer who sits at home with their PlayStation or their Xbox,
Mm-hmm.
we understand what you need and we're able to provide it to you. Very similar to, I suppose, Formula One, like a much
Right.
bigger scale example of it.
Yes.
So, um, because Mercedes-Benz is in Formula One,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to sell you our Formula One car, but
Yeah.
the cars, but the
Like how
cars
many?
that, yeah, but the cars that we are going to sell you, there's benefits that come from our involvement in Formula
Right,
One. So a
right.
similar kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You obviously work with a variety of brands to bring them closer to people who have a passion that is sort of relevant to what they're selling, or relevant, let's say, that is their relevant market, to put it in a better way. How do you sort of work on formulating strategies around marketing presentation? I don't know if that's like a very loaded and roundabout way of asking, like, how do you strategize for these brands? Like, how does it work? How does the process work?
That's a very broad question.
Yeah. It's
So
literally your whole job.
I think where you often see people getting it wrong, and something I'm always cognizant of, and I think it's very true in a gaming esports sort of world, is um, sponsorship is a very much an evolving thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that long ago where sponsorship was just viewed as we're gonna plonk our brand logo
Mm.
onto a advertising board on the side of a broadcast or in a squeeze back around a live sporting event, and that has changed completely. And now a fan or if you want to talk about it, a passion. So if you want to take it into a more less sport, more wine or food sort of space,
Mm.
um, that individual is expecting you as a brand to add something to the experience. So they're not going to take it anymore that you are just almost taking from what they are passionate about. If you're going to be there and they're going to pay attention to you, you need to do it in a way that is going to elevate how they
Mm-hmm.
experience it and what they do. So I suppose that's the first thing I always start with. So if we're advising a brand on where to go and what to get involved in and where to sponsor, that's very much a starting point. It doesn't necessarily mean like telecom and gaming is a very literal example because
Mm-hmm.
they have the tools that you internet,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you can engineer that. I think
Yes.
like a great example of it in an esports sort of world is DHL. Like I'm
Right.
sure you've seen what they
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
in a kind of European environment. They've literally had fans chanting their names
Yeah, that
at
is a
live events.
win. That
Yeah,
is a
it's
W
crazy.
of
So,
notes. Yeah.
and that's not like Telkom and BS Gaming. They've engineered that. So I think,
Mm.
yeah, long long answer to your question is kind of that's where I start. Is how do
Mm-hmm.
we, what tools do we have to either elevate a fan's experience, or is there kind of a tension or a problem that we can solve for
Mm-hmm.
a fan to help them better enjoy
Solving
it?
a
Yeah.
problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big thing. That's actually super interesting. My cogs are like turning. So do you find that there are a lot of challenges when when you need to sort of create that link? Like I don't know what it looked like for DHL getting involved in esports, for example, but if someone was like, we want to be in the esports market, and what we do is we sell umbrellas. Like, how do you
Mm.
deal with those? How do you create that link when they're when it's really tough to find?
Yeah, that's when creativity comes into
Yeah.
play, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose you just need to find it. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, also I don't know huge amounts of detail of how DHL achieved that, but
Mm.
what I do know is that um, that example of the fans chanting their name was a little
Mm.
while back. I think it was pre-COVID, and
Mhm.
it was when esports was still quite an emerging thing. So
Yes.
that's not to say that they weren't filling arenas full of fans. I think those fans weren't used to having big name blue chip companies attached
Mhm.
to the thing that they were experiencing. So when
Right.
DHL came in, I think their tactics were relatively simple. They just kind of came in and leveled up the experience and gave away prizes and just
Mhm.
added to the fun, and that was enough then. It's probably
Right.
enough, not enough anymore,
Right.
but then it was enough. So it's really just doing, I suppose research is very important, data
Mhm.
is very important to understand what the audience you're targeting wants
Yes.
and find a way with authentic way.
Mhm.
Realism and authenticity is really important.
Yeah.
I think there's many examples, not not only in gaming but in marketing broadly, of brands who sort of jump on a bandwagon and
Mhm.
think that, to give a gaming example, that I can just put my logo on something and that will
Mhm.
make me relevant to a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah.
So authenticity and realism is extremely important,
Yeah.
but finding that kind of link between the two things is how you win, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, obviously, telecom has been prevalent. I mean, even just from an outsider's perspective, I've seen telecom involved in esports, and obviously, what's happening is has been efficient. You know, so far. I'm sure you have bigger goals in future, but
Yeah.
what is another, if you can, like share, what is another example of work that you're doing in the, not you yourself, I know you are representing Levergy,
hmm
but what is something else that you're working on in the esports space that we can sort of look to?
Yeah. I mean, we limited to telecom, so it's
Mhm.
solely VS Gaming
Mhm.
is where we're working at the moment. But I think you can take a lot of cues, um, because I think you'll agree, like our industry is relatively, I was going to say the word fledgling, but I think we're more than that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're definitely more than that. But I think if you kind of look at other examples in more established, more I suppose, matured sort of
Mm.
versions of passions, there's many things that we are doing that will be able to inform how we approach VS gaming
Mhm. Mhm.
moving forwards, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe that was a bit of an ignorant question actually.
No, no worries.
But just to kind of circle back to VS Gaming then, what is VS Gaming exactly doing? Because for me, I'm aware of the Telcom brand. I know that what is happening is effective because I personally have experienced that exposure to the brand through esports.
hmm
But what exactly is VS Gaming doing? For anyone who might not know, let's put it that way.
Okay. Um, so I suppose in layman's terms,
Mm.
it's a facilitator of tournaments. So
Mhm.
if you want to enter a world of esports, so we were talking about gaming versus esports, you want to move from a gamer and become an esports participant, you can do that through VS Gaming, and that's across the spectrum. So
Mhm.
it's right from a total beginner who wants to do it for the first time, right through to some of the most elite gamers that exist in South Africa,
Mhm.
and that's across various different gaming platforms. I think one thing that they do particularly well, that I think that they can be quite proud of, is their schools league.
Mhm.
So when I was at school, there certainly
No.
wasn't gaming competitions.
No.
So something that was originally quite foreign to me, but
Yeah.
yeah, to be able to compete in that world between different schools, and there's a national champion every year, I think is something that's really cool, and that's something that is
Yeah.
really helping grow the industry, the sport. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Marseille also spoke about the importance of that grassroots involvement. And I think that applies to many things, not only just gaming and esports. It's just like a general, like,
Yeah.
where do you start with changing something or like growing something? It's obviously with the youth. Obviously in schools, kind of getting people to take things more seriously, that we want to be taken more seriously and that should be taken more seriously. And I feel like that's almost the wrong way to say it, like taken more seriously, because
Mm.
there are a lot of people who do take it very
Yeah.
seriously. It's full-time employment for many, many people.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's interesting that you brought up the school aspect, the sort of grassroots side of things. It is obvious why that is important, but I kind of want to hear in your words why school involvement or like grassroots involvement is so important?
Well, I think it applies to any sport, not
Mm,
necessarily just esports.
mm,
And you touched on it. It's um, a youngster who has a passion for that, whether it's esports or cricket or rugby or whatever,
mm,
is going to take it far more seriously if there is a platform for them to be able to, I suppose, fully involved in it at a
mm,
young age.
mm,
So, I mean, when I was at school, I spoke about how that didn't exist. I mean, when I was at school, a very traditional sport like golf
mm-hmm.
wasn't a very recognized school
Oh, I thought you were
sport.
gonna say you had
Like,
golf at your school. I was like, oh,
no,
sorry.
we did.
Oh, you
We did.
did. Oh,
And I
wow.
was in the golf
Okay.
team, but there was one golf team for the entire high school of
Okay.
like, I can't remember what it was. It was like 8 boys or something like that.
Okay. So you
And
okay, yeah, I guess we had that as well. I even forgot because it was
yeah,
so small.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just using that as an example.
Mm.
So, you know, compare that to cricket or rugby, where, at open age group, there can be 15 rugby teams
Mm.
in some schools. That's a much more, I suppose, real thing for someone to set a goal to, or to
Mhm.
pursue, or to follow. So it's really important that in these kind of more growing kind of initiatives, that there's that kind of vision for a kid to look at and see the path forward,
Mhm.
rather than having to, at that age, it's difficult to do that yourself,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So if the path is laid out in front of them, there's likely going to be more of them that choose to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of like that kind of, I have to convince my teachers and my parents to take me seriously. Like I'm really good at this.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
imagine when we were at school going home and saying, I need to sit in front of my computer
Yeah.
for
Like.
another 8 hours after school.
Yeah.
Why? Now there's a reason why,
Yeah,
and a good
exactly.
reason why.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What are the sort of parallels, or rather the differences in strategizing and looking at sponsorships for traditional physical sports as opposed to esports? Of course, like the market is there are overlaps. I'm not going to say gamers don't do
Mm.
traditional sport or vice versa. But what are the sort of differences in catering to the esports market or the gaming market as opposed to
Yeah,
traditional sports?
yeah. So I think the core of it is something I described just now, as you more likely to be speaking to a participant in
Mm-hmm.
gaming, not
Right,
necessarily
right. Yeah.
esports. Um, and that changes it to an extent. Um, but yeah, I think there are quite a lot of parallels. But I suppose really you need to be looking at um, somebody, I guess, who is going to be sitting there as, I actively want to know what this brand is going to contribute to what I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
when I come home from work, to relieve stress, to have fun, to forget the day that was behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that in such a way that I suppose is going to really attract them, and make them pay attention to what you, as a brand who they don't necessarily associate sitting at home and playing FIFA on my
Mm-hmm.
PlayStation with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about how do you crack that, as opposed to, if you're looking at a soccer sponsorship, it's
Mm-hmm.
more like, I'm a fan of Kaiser Chiefs, so
Mm-hmm.
how can I leverage that person's love for Kaiser Chiefs? So it's two
Right.
relatively different things, but also some similarities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting. Like I'm kind of dwelling on the point of like your job isn't just trying to put something forward to people. It's really considering what matters to them and how you can kind of evolve that, and
Yeah,
like grow that passion and offer them what they need. As you said, like what do I need to solve? Like what is the problem
e-
that needs to be solved?
exactly. And I'll take it
Mm.
back to, I mentioned realism, authenticity. Like,
Mm.
for me, whether it's gaming or anything else in marketing and in sponsorship at the moment, like, that is the absolute key in terms of
Mm.
how you're going to reach the audience that you're targeting. There's been a couple of examples in the last few years where, and very recently as well. I don't know if you've seen the Bud Light
Mm-hmm.
thing that's going on in the last 2 weeks,
I don't
which
think. Do you want to tell
I don't
me?
necessarily want to get into that.
I'll go
But
research later.
yeah, go have a look at it for yourself, and I suppose
Ah,
viewers can go
interesting.
check it out themselves as well. But
Okay.
they executed something that was, I suppose, they felt that they would potentially reach a new target audience
Mm.
with it, but they forgot about their current audience. So so they completely alienated their an
Okay.
actual beer drinker, and
Right.
it's wiped. I think their sales have dropped by 20%. Gillette did something similar a couple of years ago,
I remember
and
that, yeah.
yeah, and they
Mm.
wiped, I think it was between $6 and $8 billion off of their share price. And it's because there's this tendency at the moment for people to forget who they actually talking to, and
Mm.
to jump on a bandwagon and to do something inauthentically. So
Mm.
purpose-led marketing, fantastic. Um, Coming into a space like esports to reach a young person, fantastic.
Mm.
But do it in a way where your target audience are going to value what they're doing, and they're going to see that you are genuinely contributing
Mm.
to their lives, to what they love, to what they care about. They will see through you straight away
Yes.
if you come in there and you only looking after yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the same can kind of be said for, paid partnerships in individuals. Like if someone's promoting
Yeah,
something, they say like the difference between an influencer and KOL is that a key opinion leader knows what they're talking about
yeah.
as opposed to like an influencer. Like they're very specific on choosing brands that they associate with and stuff. And I think it's just that if someone gets to know a personality and then suddenly there's a little switch, they're like, Leonardo DiCaprio meme
Yeah,
where he whistles.
yeah. And going back to esports, you see a lot of that in esports.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
in the last couple of years in South Africa. You see
Mm,
brands who have typically worked with certain personalities that have done very well for them in a more traditional space.
mm,
But then you put them into esports, and it actually devalues the actual personalities and the actual real superstars of that world. Because,
right.
like we're now involved in esports. Let's get X celebrity to play a game or to take on someone, and you
Yeah.
would never do that to a rugby player or a cricketer. People would
Yeah.
go, "That's like why,"
Yeah, exactly.
But
It's like
yeah,
there's maybe a place for that if it's a bit humorous and it's a play on
mm,
the fact that this person is quite new to the industry or something, right? There
yeah,
could be space for that, but otherwise, it's like people are kind of going to be like, but they don't know. They
exactly.
haven't
It's
been
like
through the whole journey with
exactly, and I
that.
think it's a case of like, to a lot of people, it's a world that they don't know, so they
Mhm.
just go to what they know, and they go, "Oh, I know that X radio DJ loves playing his PlayStation when he goes home,
Yeah.
so we can get him to tweet
Yeah.
about it,"
Yeah.
And no, don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. This is teaching. Like I feel like I'm learning a lot from this conversation. Are you a gamer? Do you play games or do you have any sort of background in gaming?
Um, Not really, to be totally honest with you. I've played a lot of sports focused games in my life,
Mhm.
so FIFA, cricket, those sorts of games. I played a lot of FIFA as a kid, but I
Mhm.
suppose that's the limit to my experience.
Yeah,
But
you get those two sides. Like
yeah,
I feel like I've never played FIFA.
oh
Like
really?
I've never played FIFA ER. Um yeah, but it's interesting a lot of people I speak to that, haven't played like sort of the traditional and like artsy games or
hmm
whatever it is, have still played FIFA.
hmm
Like that kind of shows you how prevalent it is, right?
It is.
Yeah.
But I guess the interesting thing about it is, um, most people my age and younger
Mm.
are are playing a spectrum of games,
Yeah.
and that's why I keep referring back to speaking to our participants. So
Mm.
a gaming audience is much broader than what most people perceive it to be. So
Mhm.
when you talk about esports, it's still relatively niche, but if you talk
Yes.
about gaming, most people my age are playing League of Legends, and they
Something.
are
Yeah.
playing something in that world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Is Candy Crush an esport?
interesting question. No.
No, I wouldn't say so.
No.
Just curious. I don't play it. I play Farmville. It's just as bad.
My wife plays Candy Crush.
Oh, really?
And it annoys me because she loves to, like, that's how she zones out on the couch and just does that.
Yeah,
And that, yeah.
It's so. I have a game, but I play a game called Farmville on my phone, and that's, separated
heard
from
of
my
it.
gaming, my real gaming side. But it's every time I do it, I'm like, I know they just make the sounds and the vibrations and the colors so that I play this every night before I go to bed, and I feel so like
No, I mean,
silly for it. But
this is probably controversial, but I wouldn't even call that gaming. Like,
yeah.
it's like, I don't know what it is. It's like
What
when
what is it?
like when I look at her playing Candy Crush
Yeah.
like that, it reminds me of like playing Tetris and when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
I
Like,
suppose it would fall into the category of like word escapes, like finding like crosswords and like
maybe
Sudoku, maybe
I've never
something
thought of
like
it like
that.
that, but maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Okay, so in terms of sponsorships, what is the sort of importance in the growth of esports in South Africa of sponsorships?
hmm So I think more so than I keep comparing it to traditional sports and
Yeah,
whatever, but
yeah, fair.
I think more so than football or rugby or cricket that already have huge mass audiences. In that world, it's I suppose less of a quid pro quo
Mm-hmm.
because when you're attaching yourself to that, you already know that there's a huge audience that you're speaking to and there's a big reach. When you're
Mm-hmm.
coming into esports, the benefit that a big brand can give to an esports property or a gaming property is the audience that they bring with them,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
an interesting, unique thing.
Mm-hmm.
So by virtue of, and I guess that's relative to who it is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so if it's a little bit more of a dry sort of brand, maybe not. But if it
Mm-hmm.
is a brand that has an existing cool factor or a fan base, they have the ability to draw more attention to what's going on in that world and bring people with them. I think an obvious answer is funding. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's what a sponsorship brings any kind of organization, any kind of rights holder in any world very much relies on sponsorship
Mm.
budgets to be able to execute what they do
Yeah.
and what they put forward. But yeah, I think the unique thing about gaming and esports is that a brand knows that because where it is in its lifespan,
Mm.
it's not going to come with the tens of millions that a rugby or soccer does.
Mm.
So they're going to have to create a program around the investment that they've put into it
Mm.
that will not only draw the fans that exist, but also draw more people around
Right.
that sort of project.
Yeah.
So I think you need again you're going to need to exercise a little bit more creativity and
Mm.
ingenuity, but it really will come with benefit to both parties, which is I
Right.
think an exciting thing for esports at the moment.
I suppose that kind of makes me think that there's a benefit to an outsider brand getting involved in esports, to the esports, industry, and that is
Mm.
that it'll bring other people in,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so like I don't want to like mention any kind of brands, but like a plants brand, because those are things. We'll bring all
Well,
the botanists into gaming,
I I think like to flip that, if you're a bit of a niche brand and if you're I suppose if you're a startup like Wager,
Mm,
um, I I think what esports does have is although it may not have the numbers that rugby or
mm,
cricket has, the numbers that it does have are very likely to be extremely engaged.
yes, yes.
So extremely interested in anything that happens within this world that they are
Mm-hmm.
passionate about.
Yes.
So that's probably a powerful thing that esports or gaming could do for a sponsor is um, if you are trying to build a base or build an audience, they're going to pay attention to you straight
Mm-hmm.
away. Telkom also works in netball, and
Mm-hmm.
netball from the synergies or the comparison you can make between those two properties is the same. It's like there is a massive number of people who participate in netball,
Mm-hmm.
but probably not as many fans as
Right.
a rugby or cricket or soccer. Um, and in the same way, that presents an opportunity to speak to an audience base that are really highly engaged in what
Right.
anybody has to say
Mm.
around the thing that they are participating in and the thing that they love doing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I'm so glad you kind of brought that point up because I think it's only recently that a lot of brands have started looking at engagement as opposed to numbers because
Yeah.
there's a quality to numbers that needs to be specified, right?
Yeah.
And it's frustrating for like let's say micro influencers or micro KOLs to be like, okay, I've got like 10,000 followers, so this brand doesn't want to work with me because it's not enough. And then you can have someone, and it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you can have someone with 100,000 followers who bought half of them.
Yeah.
And therefore they're not getting any engagement from that side of their audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about esports and gaming and like streaming probably specifically is that it's taken kind of like a mass communication model that we get from TV, but then it's put an immediate feedback aspect
Mm.
into it, and that is something that fascinates me. I'm just kind of like, you're getting immediate feedback all the time from your audience and a potential market.
Yeah. I think the micro influencer point is really interesting, and
Mm.
it's also something that a lot of people miss sometimes, and a lot of people don't understand. Is
Yeah.
that similar to what I was describing about a gaming audience? And I think there's a very strong set of micro influencers that exist in that
Mhm.
world, but in any world, um, a micro influencer and a whatever you want to call them, a macro influencer,
Mm.
do very different jobs. So
Yeah.
similarly to what I was talking about around choosing whether you're going to sponsor a rugby audience for mass reach or a gaming
Right.
audience or a netball audience for engagement, it's
Mhm.
the same thing with macro and micro influencers. So we employ a tactic every now and again that we call it, it's just our word for it, we call it a Twitter army,
Mhm.
where you very carefully select 100, 150 uh, individuals with smaller followings instead of funneling that money into
Yes.
one big person with 1 million followers.
Yes.
And that is often far more effective than the one person with 1 million followers, because the
Right.
people who do follow those individuals have a very
Yeah.
specific reason for following them,
Yes.
want to hear when they are talking about
Trust their
a specific
opinion.
topic,
Yeah.
and it works very well.
I'm
Mm.
sure. I'm sure I had Telkom comment on a tweet of mine. I'm just remembering this now. I don't even remember what it was about. I need to check. I'll check after this, but I'm sure I had Telkom reply to one of my tweets the other day. And I was like, "Oh, hey, little old me." Thanks.
Yeah, I think
mm.
it's a pretty common tactic for people who, I don't know what your tweet said, but for people who are speaking about things that are relevant to their
Yeah, no,
world,
I
or
don't think it was relevant at
okay,
all.
not okay. Well,
No.
then it wasn't us. I don't know.
That's so, yeah, I just like twigged in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I wanted to again, I feel like I've kind of been back and forth with our like it hasn't been very chronological, but I keep thinking of different
Mm,
things. I wanted to ask you from like a personal perspective, if I were to want to get involved in what you're doing,
yeah.
how did it happen for you, and how would someone get involved in strategy and communications?
So my story is very roundabout. Um, in a very brief nutshell, I kind of fell into it. So
Mhm.
I loved sport. I mentioned golf earlier. I
Mm.
wanted to be a pro golfer, and that didn't quite pan out. So then I looked at other avenues to be able to get into that world,
Mm.
and was put onto the world of managing sportsmen, um, and was advised that uh, going a legal route, like doing a law degree,
Mhm.
would be a good way to do that, because obviously a sportsman needs contractual advice, they need
Right.
sponsorship negotiation. So I went and did a law degree, which I've never used. Like, I
Okay.
don't regret doing it, but that's another story for another day. And then out of that, I literally just, because the world of athlete management is pretty small in South
Mm.
Africa, I just needed to find a way into the sports industry in South Africa. And the company who currently owns Levergy was at that point starting a sports marketing agency. And I was one of the first employees in that and fell into the marketing side and loved it and stuck with it ever since. So
Mhm.
so my story is a bit of a roundabout. I wouldn't advise people to follow the route that I
Yeah.
followed. But yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a different take on what makes a good strategist or a good
Mhm.
comms person. You can go to Red and Yellow or to Vega, you can go to UJ and study those things specifically. Um, but it's really about, and that will help, but it is really about a mindset, a way of thinking about things, a
A
way
way
of
of viewing
approaching things.
things. Yeah.
So you have to be quite a logical thinker.
Mm.
You have to be an analytical thinker. So if you're somebody who looks at the world around you and is very interested in understanding the way things work and the
Mhm.
background behind things, then you'll probably make a good strategist. What I would say for our world is different to sort of advertising, although there are synergies with what we do and advertising. I think to succeed as a strategist or a comms person in what Levergy does specifically, you do need to have quite a deep interest in the things that people are passionate about. So
Mhm.
you need to
Mhm.
understand sport, you need to understand gaming, and there is a degree of consistency behind those things. So you
Mhm.
just need to really almost intuitively know what makes someone tick.
Right.
So a fan is a fan, I like to think, and people might disagree with me on that, but I think whether you're a football fan and you're passionate about that, or whether you're an esports fan and you're passionate about that, the
Mhm.
way that you're likely to react to it and approach to it and the things that are likely to grab you are relatively consistent and
Mhm.
similar, but you really need to understand what makes a fan of something tick.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I guess will help you to succeed. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm gonna look into this. Coming for your job.
Yeah.
No, I think it's super, super interesting. I'm always like, I always very much admire people who do things like what you do. I wanted to ask you as well, if you can say, you say sort of broadly that you work with people's passions.
Hmm.
What is one of the a random sort of interesting passion that you work in um I don't want to say promoting, that's not the word, but you know what I mean.
Okay. How about sneakers?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
Barry
wearing
would love that.
wearing New Balance. New Balance are a client. So
Okay.
um, we work with them. I mean, a lot of what we do is in the sports space. So
Mhm.
running is very big. They used to be in cricket. They still sell cricket product. They used to sponsor the Proteas. But more and more what we're doing for them is because sneaker culture is becoming,
Mhm.
I mean, it's always been there, but it really is going through a boom period.
Mhm.
So the interest in the world of sneakers and limited edition shoes and
Mhm.
limited silhouettes and styles, that I suppose is becoming more than ever. If you want to call it a
Mhm.
passion point, it's becoming a passion
It's a
point,
whole
and
thing, yeah.
and New Balance in particular have been, you know, globally quite a leader in that world
Mhm.
in terms of um, I suppose OG kind of silhouettes and old school 80s styles that they're
Mhm.
bringing back and things like that. So yeah, I suppose that's a cool example to give you.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could chat about this for ages. It's super fascinating to me. Rob, thank you so, so much. I think we'll leave it there for now. It
Cool.
was really interesting talking to you, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back sometime.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.